The Revenge of the Mummy is a dark ride roller coaster hybrid themed around the 90s classic Mummy series. You all know it, you all love it. The Mummy takes you into the depths of a mummy's tomb and launches you at 40 miles per hour into a full roller coaster experience. Depending on which park you're at, the story and theming varies, but regardless, all versions of the attraction put guests face to face with dusty mummies and scary flashing cardboard cutouts. So today we'll take a look at the history of the Revenge of the Mummy at all three Universal parks that it's located at. In order to accurately tell the story of the Mummy, we're gonna have to go all the way back to the year 1932. Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, and the Great Emu War just began in Australia. You know, the famous war where farmers fought a battle against 20,000 emus and lost. But also at the same time, Universal just released The Mummy, and it was a smash hit in the box office despite the mixed critical reviews. Boris Karloff sold audiences on the story and character of Imhotep, an Egyptian mummy who was killed for trying to resurrect his dead lover Anck-su-namun. And he is of course brought back to life by a team of explorers who are just getting up to no good. As per usual for Karloff, he adds some much needed depth to this character, and I think people really underestimate how much of the remake borrows from this original movie. The Mummy was one of the few Universal monster movies not to receive a sequel. Rather, it was kind of remade at one point and reimagined with the 1959 movie The Mummy's Hand, which would tell a completely different story about another mummy named Karis, while also stealing footage from the original to tell his backstory. This version would have 3 sequels and a crossover with Abbott and Costello. There would be a mummy dry spell up until the late 80s, until producers James Jacks and Sean Daniel decided they wanted to bring back The Mummy and make a remake of the original film. They brought this idea to Universal and they were completely receptive of the idea, but they kind of wanted to make it this cheap slasher-esque horror franchise and only offered them $10 million to make the movie, which is something that they weren't really wanting to do. At one point, George A. Romero even wrote a treatment and was probably going to be the director of the film, and his idea would take place in the modern day with scientists bringing back a mummy who plots to destroy the world. The studio wanted the Mummy to be an unlikable kind of Terminator type of character. This concept was kind of hollow and basic and wasn't really, again, what they were looking to do. This would lead the producers to sit on the idea for a little bit until Clive Barker would become a household name with his film Hellraiser, leading Jacks and Daniel to recruit him to pen his own concept, which honestly sounds like a really cool idea for a movie. This concept would have been incredibly dark and violent and takes place in a museum in Beverly Hills where they rebuild this Egyptian tomb. Jacks was quoted with saying that his take was dark, sexual, and filled with mysticism, which of course Universal would absolutely hate and consider the film to be too perverted to be made, which makes me feel like Universal dropped the ball on what could have been a cult classic. I respect the vision. Finally, Universal got it together and decided that the Mummy concept should be a large budget period piece, and while all these writers are, trying to get Universal to take their concept of the Mummy, Stephen Sommers managed to just kind of sneak in his own treatment. Way too long story short, he came up with the idea of the Mummy being a large, big-budget action horror adventure movie. The 1999 Mummy is the perfect example of blending genres and doing a remake that can stand on its own from the original. It featured fun and interesting characters like Rick O'Connell, played by Brendan Fraser, American Treasure, obviously, and badass Hunk, and he's so fine that people are still literally thirsting over him to this day, and of course Rachel Weisz as Evelyn, the smart and outgoing historian, and her brother Jonathan, played by John Hannah, who's probably one of the most underrated comic relief characters of all time. I would die for him. And of course Imhotep, who is expertly played by Arnold Vosloo, who brings a Shakespearean level dedication to the role, but they gave Imhotep a good balance of being almost sympathetic as well as terrifying and evil. And I could go on into depth about how much I love this movie, but this is a video about the ride, not the film. Obviously, The Mummy would be a huge hit in the box office. With a budget of only $80 million, it made over $400 million in the box office, and overnight, Universal would have their next big hit franchise. Universal would quickly greenlight the sequel, and Stephen Sommers and crew would begin development during the opening weekend of the first movie. It's pretty crazy how fast they turned this around. He would quickly ask the cast if they were willing to come back for another, and Fraser said he'd only come back if he approved of the script. Sommers actually agreed with him and was quoted saying, "If I can't pull off this script, use that as an excuse to get out of it." This was a win-win for them because Sommers also stated that he wouldn't do the film without him. So if the script sucked and he wanted to bail, he had the option, which I love. That's awesome. If it wasn't good, they tried their best and they would just both walk away. Sommers spent 7 weeks writing the script, and while doing so, he researched a pharaoh once known as the Scorpion King. I mean, he wouldn't keep it at all historically accurate and would sprinkle in some fun supernatural elements in there, which would lead us all to the scary CGI monster scorpion rock. But nonetheless, Fraser, after a couple of rewrites, liked the script enough to join back on for the sequel, as well as the rest of the cast. This movie was so awesome when I was a kid. but nowadays it's just a very sequelitis version of the original. I love seeing these characters and I still have fun with this one, but the plot gets so silly at some points. They're flying in like a giant hot air balloon, they get encountered by a group of zombified monkeys, and of course the ugly CGI rock, which we will never shut up about. All in all, the movie was a huge hit. On a budget of $98 million, managed to bag Universal over $400 million, and it broke several box office records that were held that year. Critically, it got mixed reviews, but who cares? Universal stuck the landing and managed to turn The Mummy into a multi-million-dollar franchise. And soon Universal would want to profit off of this, so of course they turned to their theme parks. In May of 2001 at Universal Studios Hollywood, and utilizing the space that would become the House of Horrors, Universal created the first Mummy-themed attraction with The Mummy Returns Chamber of Doom. Using props and set pieces from the film, Universal created a haunted walkthrough experience that would take guests through various spooky cursed temples themed around the movie. I'm not going to get into super detail on this topic because I've already covered it in my last video on the House of Horrors, so if you want to go check it out, yeah, links up there, it's up top. Long story short, the permanent haunt attraction was a smash hit and gave Universal confidence to continue to develop their concept of a mummy themed ride. Director Steven Sommers and Universal Creative, helmed by creative director John Murdy, would team up to conceptualize a multimedia roller coaster dark ride hybrid for both Universal Studios Hollywood and Florida. Both attractions would focus on playing on guests' various phobias such as fear of the dark and of course creepy little crawlies. Sadly, this attraction would come at a great cost for both Universal Orlando and Hollywood, because in order to build each ride they would have to close two classic Universal attractions, with Orlando losing Confrontation, one of the largest scale dark rides I've ever seen, and at Hollywood with the E.T. Adventure, a classic that is still open in Orlando, thank God. Or I guess maybe Steven Spielberg.
E.T.
After making Universal fans everywhere cry, Universal began construction on their brand new, first of its kind, psychological thrill ride. The coaster would be manufactured by Premier Rides, and us West Coast people might know them from the people who built, Full Throttle and West Coast Racers at Magic Mountain, and Dynamic Attractions would also come in to help with the spinning sections of the track. The coaster would use linear induction motors to launch guests deep into the mummy's tomb, and it would take Universal about a year to construct each track. In Orlando, they would have to build around the already existing Confrontation track due to the fact that it was built into the ceiling and built into the building, and in Hollywood they would dig underground to squeeze as much space as possible out of the old ET building. The first to open would be the Orlando version, with it opening on May 21st, 2004, and as soon as it opened, guests were delighted with one of the best indoor themed roller coasters of all time. The facade of the Florida version is a museum of antiquities, and guests walk through the film set of a fictional sequel titled Revenge of the Mummy. This area is kind of a mini museum of props and concept art from the original Mummy film, and TVs playing in the queue talk about making the movie. The twist is, the documentary also discussed how the curse from the movie is actually real and was causing many issues for the cast and crew of the movie. Luckily now they're using Magi medallions in order to ward off any of the curses that might affect the set, but of course our silly himbo Brendan Fraser refuses to wear the medallion. It's really fun how they play Brendan Fraser as this insane super diva celebrity. It's so much fun and it's super silly. This is where we're introduced to on-set PA Reggie as Brendan Fraser orders him to get him another cup of coffee. During this, Brendan Fraser steals his Magi medallion. We then see Reggie, after a series of accidents, end up in a sarcophagus. The next part of the queue is very well themed around a 1940s archaeological site, and this is where you'll board your minecart. Once the ride begins, you'll enter a room of Imhotep's tomb where you'll see an almost mummified Reggie. He begs guests to run for their lives because the curse is real, and this is when Imhotep, a super impressive and fluid animatronic, emerges from his own sarcophagus, and Reggie begs riders to find the Magi medallion. Before he can finish though, Imhotep literally sucks the soul out of him, and Imhotep states that with the rider's souls he can rule for all of eternity. The car then moves into another room that is filled with treasure, and Imhotep appears as Sandman from Spider-Man 3 on a screen and attempts to persuade riders with never-ending riches, but also says if you disagree you'll die anyway, so I don't really understand his plan here. This is when suddenly soldier statuettes pop up and fire fills the entire room, and the coaster takes a small slow dip where it pauses at a wall that is covered with creepy crawly flesh-eating scarabs. Guests also get to feel the feeling of them crawling all over their feet thanks to a simple effect, which is just a tiny rubber hose that shoots out compressed air, which is, it's scary. I hated this as a child. The cart slowly escapes from that wall and moves backwards where we see a Magi marking. This then fades into another weird Spider-Man 3 Sandman face. Imhotep explains that the Magi can't save you now and there is no escape, and your ends will be his beginning. which is a fun, cheeky little reference to the movies with the quote, "Death is only the beginning." And the card turns once again, and Imhotep sparkling all around you tells you, "Behold your fate, this will be your destiny." And very quickly, the train car launches uphill at 40 miles per hour into CGI Imhotep's mouth. This launches guests into the actual roller coaster portion of the ride, where guests will do many twists and turns and slight drops, all while projections and fire pop up all around you. The ride then reaches another stop where a female ride attendant tells guests to remain seated and gives that classic theme park spiel, only for guests to realize that this is a false ending as Imhotep steals the soul of the ride operator and breaks the glass in the control room. He then sets the room on fire and says, "Prepare to offer your souls." The ride then goes through one more coaster section where Imhotep shoots smoke and fire at the guests until we are ultimately saved by the Mark of the Magi, which I guess he was lying earlier because they did it, they saved us. We then see Brendan Fraser again on the screen where he asks us if we've enjoyed ourselves and then utters the famous line, "I would have enjoyed it more if I got my cup of coffee." Then see a mummy hand him a cup of coffee and he's killed off screen, and that's pretty much the ride. The Mummy is a modern classic attraction featuring many different effects and impressive animatronics, and as sad as it was to lose Confrontation, I think this was the best we could have gotten out of its closing, and I highly doubt Universal is planning on changing it anytime soon. On the Hollywood side of things, the ride would open a month after Orlando's attraction and would be drastically different. The bones are still there, it's an interior roller coaster themed around the Mummy films, but due to the fact that Hollywood has way less of a footprint to work off, the ride would be much shorter and less impressive. I still love the Hollywood version, it's what I grew up on, but seeing how much fun they had with the Orlando version makes Hollywood seem very, no pun intended, soulless. Rather than focusing on a set terrorized by the real curse of Imhotep, the ride is based in the universe of the films rather than being a meta joke. This makes it a bit cooler because you actually enter a mummy's tomb, and after some switchbacks, you watch a screen where a ghost spirit lady basically just talks about Imhotep and talks about him rising again. Guests will then enter very similar looking mine carts and the ride begins. One thing I guess I really like about this ride is that you've passed various dead mummies as you're going through the first couple of rooms. They almost spring to life as if we're kind of watching like the curse spread through the tomb live before our eyes. Very fun, very cool. On top of us, we see a man getting eaten by beetles on an LCD screen as he cries out that we should run for our lives. The curse is real. Imhotep lives. And we pass through a hallway filled with little animatronic mummies, and hands reach out for us from the ceiling, which is one of my favorite parts. I always try to give him a little high five. Then Sandman Imhotep appears again, and we enter another treasure room where he says very similar stuff about, you're gonna get rich or I'm gonna kill you. This is where we turn a corner to see Imhotep with the Book of the Dead reciting some kind of chant. Suddenly, guard mummies drop from the walls and we are launched at 45 miles per hour, and after getting our photo taken we are thrown through a bunch of twists and turns with projections of mummies popping out of the darkness. The cart then hits a wall and we see the same scarab effect used in the Orlando version, and of course we feel them crawling up our legs. I love that so much. The ride car is then propelled backwards and we go through more twists and turns until we see a large projection of Imhotep's mouth. We then enter a fog-filled room, the ride spins itself back facing forward, and on a tiny screen in front of us, Imhotep screams, "No!" And then a strobe goes off and the ride's over. Originally, this scene was much more impressive, and if you've been on the ride before, you can tell that it looks like there's a set around you, you just can never see it because you're in the dark filled with fog. But the original was really cool. You'd be in like the ruins of a temple that was burning, and above you, you would see the ghostly face of Imhotep screaming for one last time. It's much better. I've never seen this before. I don't know why they haven't tried to bring that back, because the ending of the Mummy is always so weird. Sometimes the fog doesn't even happen and you're just like sitting there and it's just kind of spinning around and it gets stuck. Maybe it's because often you get stuck in that room, so the effect didn't work. But again, I think it would just add so much more to the ride. Maybe us together can start a petition to bring back the original ending of that ride because it looks so much better. So much better. It's baffling to me that both of these rides cost $40 million to make, considering Universal Orlando's is the more complex of the two. But nonetheless, the Mummy at Hollywood, being as short as it is still a fantastic attraction that I spent the better part of my childhood going on over and over and over again. Both Orlando and Hollywood's attractions feature little Easter eggs in both of their treasure rooms of the attractions that came before them, with Orlando having a golden King Kong and Hollywood having a golden E.T. Then in 2010 at Universal Studios Singapore, they would open their version of the Revenge of the Mummy and take inspiration from both attractions, dropping the meta jokes in favor of bringing guests into the world of the movie, while still utilizing a very similar ride layout of the Orlando version. This ride has a huge facade and large area of the park built around it to look like an actual Egyptian tomb, and the queue would have markings on the wall telling riders to find the Book of the Dead to defeat Imhotep. To save time, I'll just go through what is different with this ride. It's not much different, but it has a lot darker of a feel than the Orlando version, and all the animatronics look much better. Biggest being Imhotep, who shows up twice in the animatronic form and looks significantly better with more fluid animation. Otherwise, the attraction is just a big improvement on the Orlando's version. It's a little bit darker, it's a little bit spookier. Some of the projection effects are a little bit better. There's giant glowing eyes that you go through at one point in the ride. It just seems like they took everything from the original, and with, you know, it being almost 6-7 years later, they just kind of made improvements to what they could. And I think Singapore probably has the best version of this ride. But yeah, guys, you made it. Thank you for watching till the end of this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and you can check out more videos from me in the future. I'm sorry there was such a huge delay between the last videos, but right now I'm dedicated, I'm back again, and we'll be getting more content in the future. But guys, please also check me out on Blue Sky. If you haven't heard about it, it's like a Twitter replacement. It's a lot better. I'm starting to, you know, post updates about content and stuff on there. So if you want to be in the know when I'm coming out with new videos, or, you know, you want to sway me to make a video that you really want to see, that would be the place to do it. I'll leave my @ right here. Check it out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much. Bye bye.